there was a meeting recently between both Ukrainian and American officials to add the finer touches to the peace deal, to give a proposal for the Russians for them to review. And then there was a 5-hour meeting between Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Russian officials, including Vladimir Putin. And this is after 11 months of previous negotiations between the United States, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and other parties that have been haphazardly entered and then exited the conversation. Now, you would think that after the United States has issued roughly next to 7 to 8 red lines, where the United States has pulled the trigger on sanctions when it comes to India, leading it to be one of the highest tariffs that we currently have on any country in the world, where the average tariff rate for the United States right now under Trump is 35%. In India, it's 50%. And this is leading to the Indians to bring down the amount of Russian energy they are importing. That has happened in the last few weeks. And part of the reason why Vladimir Putin is in New Delhi, meeting with Narendra Modi and doing the whole, limousine diplomacy again, is because he wants to have that market share. And he wants to make sure that the Indians do not lose sight of the Russians as their main defense provider, as the Russians are still a priority for the Indians when it comes to getting defense parts, air defense systems. They particularly prefer the S-400s and the Russian air defense systems that have been provided to them in the past. While the Russians are obviously preoccupied with the war, the Indians also have so much of their armed forces still based off those systems, and so they are still very much interested in diplomacy with the Russians. Not to mention, there's also questions about nuclear power. There's also questions about the Indians wanting to deal with the deficit that they have, the trade deficit that they have with the Russians. There's a million different issues and reasons as to why the Indians are willing to engage with the Russians despite the invasion of Ukraine. But Trump has been able to apply enough economic pressure on this, and that was by applying basically any pressure at all, in order to get the Indians to at least reel in some of the energy imports that they're getting from the Russians that are helping to finance the war. And so you take a decision like that, and you would imagine, my goodness, if the Russians want to continue to have Trump engaged, then you would want to be on your best behavior. You would want to treat Donald Trump with respect. You would want to treat the United States with respect, and you would want to treat, therefore, her representatives with respect. But that is one signal. And the Trump administration is sending so many different signals at the same time. On top of that one sanction signal being sent, there's also the signal of our army secretary going around to European countries and saying, really sounding like all hope is lost. Their missile stockpile is growing at such a rapid rate that there's nothing you could do. You either take a bad deal now or a worse deal later. At the same time that he says that there's really nothing that they can provide to change the situation, even though experts do not necessarily universally agree with that conclusion. In fact, there are materials. It's just a question of whether or not they choose Ukraine to be an American priority, or if whether or not they want to deliver on the promises that have already been made so far. And so there's a combination of signals that could leave the Russians thinking, no matter how aggressive of your position on Trump is, and mine is pretty aggressive, that essentially makes the least risky position in any scenario, just wait and see. Putin thinks he can wait him out. And for 11 months, that's been the case. Irrespective of some of the sanctions being enforced, finally, the majority of the time, no sanctions were enforced. And so this has led to, I think, even Vladimir Putin, after 11 months, him getting tired of the whole charade that he himself is conducting. Listen to what he said when speaking with reporters during his meetings in India. Can you talk about your meeting with Witkoff? Putin, I doubt it would interest you to hear about it, as it lasted 5 hours. Frankly, even I grew wary of it. 5 hours is too much. Look, this back and forth diplomacy is not being treated with much seriousness by Putin. It has been treated with much seriousness by Putin since the start of the process. But to talk about it like this, shows that he really thinks he can close his eyes and just bat the ball back and forth. This is not necessarily possible if someone like Keith Kellogg, who was originally supposed to be leading the processes on stuff like this, was in the room. But when the Russians saw Keith Kellogg's knowledge on Russia, saw Keith Kellogg could speak Russian, saw that Keith Kellogg had an idea of America's national security interest, they very quickly protested and got Keith Kellogg out of the room. Now he is retiring in January, and it is people like Kushner and Steve Witkoff and Driscoll, individuals with not much diplomatic experience. Kushner somehow has the most of all of them, and tend to lean towards the idea of capitulation towards the Russians. And so that has led to a diplomatic effort that has been dominated by the carrot and henceforth shunned the stick. And when you're dealing with the Russians, a lot of times that could just lead to them taking that as a signal to keep pushing forward. Essentially, especially if you precipitate your diplomacy on, I am still going to put a red line here. There will still be consequences if you do X, Y, and Z, but you never deliver sufficiently on those consequences to build up the pressure to change the situation on the board, to change the chances for peace, the actual chances for peace. But we're nowhere near to that. And so the Russians at this point are just batting it back and forth, and it's deliberate. We can all see it. Ukrainian soldiers see Trump plan as capitulation, even as they dream of peace. From his position on the Eastern front lines, the original peace plan backed by President Donald J. Trump looked more like a proposal for Volodymyr's surrender. It's not a plan. It's a real capitulation. There is nothing to discuss here. A senior sergeant serving near Pokrovsk, a supply hub under intense pressure from Russian forces for some 18 months. While Ukrainian officials fought for changes to the 28-point plan that emerged last week, NBC News spoke with soldiers in the country's embattled military who expressed frustration to the idea Moscow would be handed its hardline demands, but also hoped that they might soon be able to return to their lives. I'm against giving up those parts of the Donetsk region that we still hold. Under the original proposal, they would lay down his weapon, leave the Donbass, compromising fiercely contested Donetsk and Russian-controlled Luhansk, would be recognized as de facto Russian. Of course, for me, this is a painful issue because all of this is happening in my homeland. Now, look, they go on to have more testimony about the amount of Ukrainian soldiers that were not happy about this. But the demands that are being asked of the Ukrainians at this point are not demands that they can secede to. And the idea that is in the head of Trump's negotiators, that the scandal of corruption in Ukraine right now can be used as an opportunity to pressure them into action, is misreading the politics deathly. It's a deathly, dastardly, deathly, terrible, no good misread of the situation. In a corruption scandal, a leader like Zelensky will have much more of natural inclinations to huddle down, batten down the hatches, and do everything to clutch on. And I don't think that trying to make him make concessions on territory where many people who have been displaced will be unhappy, as they will not be able to go home, especially those who have fought for years to hold on to the land that will now be given up without a fight. It will make it more difficult for him to make those types of compromises. Not even saying that he necessarily should. And so this read of the situation has made it so something that I already didn't think had much of a chance in succeeding in the first place, I think has next to no chance of succeeding in the immediate future. If the standards are no significant long-term security guarantees, which the Russians have yet to agree to, and the Ukrainians have to give up territory that they currently hold on to. If those two standards are held on to any peace agreement, then it will fall through. And the scenario where that does fall through is what many European leaders are scared of right now. Macron warned US could betray Ukraine in leaked leaders' call. This is from Der Spiegel. Here is the full article. We must not leave Ukraine and Volodymyr alone with these guys. This is a reference to Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Let me read you, and this has a cavalcade of different European leaders. Keir Starmer wasn't involved in these conversations, though. Interesting. the lack of him here. But I wanted to read you some of the passages from this leaked transcript of many European leaders going back and forth over the threat of America's realignment away from supporting Ukraine and now seeing themselves as a mediator of no real moral or strategic or national security responsibility to support Ukraine or see that they have a good outcome, that it's necessarily our job to do that or it's in our interests. We've moved to the role of Oman as the ultimate mediator that has stopped every war, but none, if you look at but not really many, if you look at the details, whether it's the Congo, whether it's Thailand, Cambodia. Either way, let me read you some of these passages. Macron warns Zelensky that the United States may intervene in the issue of territories without providing security guarantees and used the word betrayal. Now, this right here is talking about probably the Donetsk region and what is already occupied. So the Luhansk region, occupied parts of Kherson and Zaporizhia, Crimea, of course, the Donetsk region, and the unoccupied Donetsk region. There was rumbles that the United States government was going to announce that they recognize this territory as part of Russia as an attempt to get the Russians to agree. I said that this was not workable, and I didn't expect the United States government to do it, even though, of course, it's not impossible, considering how badly they've managed this so far. But I didn't expect them to do it because for you to make a de facto concession to rubber stamp this type of crime in Europe, and then the war continues, would be unbelievably embarrassing. The president is already polling in the negative on the issue of foreign policy, and it is in large part because he's been unable to deliver on his promises. But if he, instead of not delivering on his promises, both gives Russia a reward for the invasion while also simultaneously not stopping the war, and from the Russian perspective, encouraging further action, that would be bad. And there's no way to spin that to make it look good. And right now, Trump is polling -8 on foreign policy. Last time I checked, though it was weeks ago. And this is the type of thing that I could see certainly putting him in the double digits if the war rages on after he made territorial concessions to the Russians. And then, oh my God, and then he'd have to go out in public and make a defense about it. He'd have to go to the media and defend it. Pete Hegseth would. All these different leaders would have to. Marco Rubio, sickly. He would look white. He'd have to go there and do it. Keith Kellogg, he's retiring. He gets to go home. He doesn't have to share in that shame, at least immediately. My goodness. Either way, very, very interesting quote here. I think that the word betrayal, while a lot of people have gotten worked up about it, is accurate. I think some people look at politics personally and they don't look at politics nationally. And when you're talking about geopolitics, that's how other nation states look at it. I sometimes critique like the realist view of, not really looking into the political breakdown or the interworkings of a state. That's not really all that important. I think it's a big flaw in a lot of realist theorists. I think it's part of the reason why Mearsheimer has missed the mark so much. But if the Ukraine makes a deal with the United States and you don't personally agree with that deal after you were born 10 years after that deal's creation, that doesn't mean all of a sudden, if that deal is brought up, we can just say, oh, that's not our responsibility. Oh, we don't have to do that. I didn't like that. I didn't agree to it. Of course you didn't agree to it. You're not a diplomat. Just because you didn't agree to the Budapest Memorandum doesn't mean that, the nation state didn't, and that nations bet their goodwill, bet their national security, bet their safety, bet their economic security off of what we said we would do in a scenario where they were invaded in the future. And I think a lot of people view politics personally and not nationally. If from a national perspective, if you see it as a promise, that even if you don't like it, you're like, I did promise you $20. Damn, okay, fine. Okay, we got to figure it out. I'll figure out the $20. Even if you don't like it, you can understand that if you make promises, if you make commitments, that they should be fulfilled. And I'm not just talking about Budapest Memorandum, but I'm talking about 2022. We said we would stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. So if the Trump administration, after all of Europe and the United States said that, comes out and says, "Oh, it's taking too long," and then walks away, yeah, that's a betrayal. If our nation state declares, as long as it takes, you are going to be a member of NATO, it's just a question of when, and then we say, never mind on the when, never mind on the Budapest Memorandum and previous promises that we've made, never mind on the sacrifices to, denuclearization that you've made, never mind on everything, never mind on it all. Our promises don't matter all that much because I interpersonally don't like it. That you can't have good interstate diplomacy. Every single government's just going to be scared that the next administration is going to mean a complete redo of the entire nation's trade policy, of the entire nation's diplomatic stance, of any type of anti-terror agreements or, regulatory enforcement that you want to make between states. It's gonna completely make it haphazard. So I think that some people, while I understand that the betrayal is a harsh word, I don't think that the use of the word betrayal is necessarily too much of an exaggeration. I don't think it's no. In fact, I don't think it's an exaggeration at all. Zelensky must be very careful in these coming days. The United States is betraying Ukraine and Europe. These are the sentiments expressed by European leaders, according to a transcript of a phone call between the president of France, the German chancellor, the president of Finland, the NATO secretary general. The president of Finland would be Stubb. That's the guy who plays golf with Trump all the time. And President Zelensky. Merz, this is the German chancellor, for his part, told Zelensky that, and I quote, "The U.S. is playing games, both with you and with us." While Finland's president Stubb added, "We cannot leave Volodymyr Zelensky alone with these two men," referring to Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, the president's old real estate buddy, and now we'll just call him a haphazard peacemaker. So this type of language would not be in the public sphere if it wasn't for this being a secret phone call. This is not the publicly stated diplomatic positions of these countries. These are the private views of European leaders being expressed in a private setting where they didn't think this would get out there. If you compare this type of language to what these governments are saying publicly about Trump, one sounds like, they're ride or die Trump. The other would sound like Trump is somebody they're disgusted to even be in the room with. And this is probably a revelation, which isn't going to be that surprising to many, that the European leaders feel like they have to plug their nose to deal with the man. They think that he's terribly unreliable, that he's a backstabber, that he's playing games, that he's not able to do this diplomacy seriously, and that he's basically jerking them around. Whether or not they believe that's due to some sort of nefariousness, or whether or not that is due to some level of to just complete ignorance, we cannot say, but they feel jerked around. Now, this obviously does not speak well to transatlantic relations. But what is more interesting to me is, what does this mean? Because now that we know that these European leaders have come to that conclusion, which many of us has come to well before this point, than before this was revealed, what does that mean about the type of decision making they're making? The type of decision making they're making. Type of decision making they are engaging in. What does that mean about that? Well, one could say that this is bad because obviously we've been portrayed as a bad headline, probably doesn't help much for the morale. But on the other hand, if they really think that they can no longer buck pass and pass responsibility for supporting Ukraine to the United States anymore, because the United States is, and I quote, just playing games with them, then that could push them, irrespective of their previous desire for a American-based solution to come and swoop in and save them, that they might actually have to take action. That they cannot just wait for the United States to act, that if they want there to be action, that they might have to act themselves. And some might be able to point to the recent Pearl shipments, which they've been able to coordinate with the United States, and these purchases of American gear to send over. There was another $3.5 billion agreement to do this in different tranches agreed by Norway, who signed on to 2 tranches, and a bunch of different European states, as well as the 210 billion euros that are going to be rounded up partially through the seizing of Russian assets in Europe that is going to be discussed on December 18th. Now, not all of that money is going to go, if this is decided, because the Belgians, are, due to their protectiveness of Euroclear and their country not facing any backlash as an investor capital hub, not all that money is going to go to Ukraine. Some of that money is going to go just to pay Ukraine's previous debts, because obviously Ukraine, in trying to stand up to Russia, has built quite a few of them. Some of them are also going to go towards paying Ukraine's civil service workers. But $110 billion is still meant to go out towards its defense sector, and it's going to be handed over in tranches if this decision is made on December 18th. They have waited up until now to seize these Russian assets. This would be a major move, but it also is an indication that they probably know that the United States is not going to come in with any big aid package, irrespective of a massive shift right now in Congress, which I don't see coming. They don't see coming. And anything would probably have to wait at least a year until after the midterms, which would still be difficult due to the president's veto power if he really wanted to throw a stick in things. Not to mention, control of the Senate is likely, even under some of the best Democratic outcomes, to stay with the Republicans. Even if there are pro-Ukraine Republicans, the Republican Party is quite under the thumb of Donald Trump right now, and it would need a lot of shaking of that hand, Donald Trump's control of the party, for those people to move out from under it safely and feel that they can actually run for re-election. Because the loudest voices in the Republican Party right now are those who are not running for re-election. So I think that this could be an indication that Europe is reading the room more when it comes to the unreliability of the American administration. But what's interesting about this, irrespective of whether or not Europe is going to take all of the actions necessary, and I'm worried that they're not, because Italy, for example, has actually completely slammed the brakes on the program, the Pearl program, to purchase U.S. weapons to ship to Ukraine. And it was because their foreign minister said, hey, look, it's premature for us to participate in a program to buy weapons for Ukraine because there's ongoing peace negotiations. Mind you, and they don't want to make any of these purchases until those peace negotiations come to completion, until they know where they're going to go. Mind you, these peace negotiations have been going on since January of this year. If peace negotiations have been going on for 11 months, even if you expect peace negotiations to succeed at this pace, the peace negotiations will succeed in 2 goddamn years. And so in that time frame, you need ammunition to defend yourselves, because even the dimmest bulb should be able to tell that you can use that time to position in negotiations or to give up on negotiations entirely. And so this just seems like a very slick way for the Italian foreign minister to slide and slip out of their responsibility, of their commitment. And Giorgia Meloni has tried to show herself as, irrespective of her national, super nationalist and hard right bona fides, try to be supportive of Ukraine. But when it comes to actually providing Ukraine with the munitions to make the long haul, the "we will be with you as long as it takes" stance actually mean something, you're going to have to, it costs money. It takes effort. And if they're going to utilize Trump's piffy, unsuccessful so far peacemaking in order to get out of it, well, then the peacemaking is not just a time waster. The peacemaking is not just a dragging of feet. The peacemaking where Trump is trying to shift the responsibility for European defense back to Europe is allowing European capitals to shift the responsibility away from themselves, saying, well, look, the United States is going to solve. Wait and see. Let's wait and see. Is this kind of the behavior of vultures? Is this kind of, it's you're saying one thing, then doing another? Maybe. That's politics. The whole pitch from Donald Trump for the last decade in American politics on Europe has been that we're getting screwed.